He was found beside a rusted crate, clinging not to food or water, but to a torn stuffed bear, like it was the only soul left who hadn't left him behind. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He just stayed, waiting, beneath the blistering sun, for something the world had already forgotten. But what if that silence was never weakness? What if it was faith, holding on in the form of fur, dust, and one final heartbeat of hope? The sun scorched the Mojave sky, unrelenting and white-hot, turning the earth below into a canvas of baked sand and bleached metal. The town of Mojave Valley was the kind of place where rust outlived memory, where trailers were abandoned before the ink dried on the title, and silence clung to buildings like smoke. The air shimmered in waves across the cracked pavement outside the defunct Pine Creek freight yard, where wind danced with the ghosts of old circus flyers peeling from the chain-link fence. Miles Benton wiped the sweat from his brow with the edge of a frayed flannel sleeve. He was tall, lean in the way someone becomes after forgetting how to care for themselves. His jeans were worn to the thread, and his boots carried the dust of too many yesterdays. His hair, once dark, was peppered with gray, and a pale scar cut diagonally across his right knuckle, a reminder of a wreck he rarely spoke of. Miles had lived alone for nearly 2 years in a half-converted auto shop at the edge of town, ever since the night his 12-year-old son, Caleb, was taken by a truck that never stopped. Since then, Miles' words had become fewer, his world smaller, his grief quieter but no less heavy. He wasn't supposed to be at the yard. He'd only come looking for a discarded carburetor rumored to be lying behind one of the old circus trailers. The place had been shut down since the mid-2000s, but locals still whispered about the tigers that had once paced beneath canvas tents. All that remained now were rusting props, piles of sun-warped lumber, and an occasional windblown plastic bottle caught in dry tumbleweed. That's when he saw the crate. It sat half-swallowed by shadow behind a crumbling trailer, metal bars buckled outward like someone had tried to twist them by hand. The smell hit him first, the sour stench of heat and something far worse. He stepped closer, boots crunching through broken glass and plastic. And there, inside the rusted kennel, lay a golden retriever puppy no older than 5 months. The dog was motionless. His fur, a pale creamy gold, was matted with filth and streaked with something darker. His ribs jutted like the slats of an old fence, and his eyes, soft, honey-colored, watched Miles without blinking. He didn't bark. Didn't growl. Just clutched a battered stuffed animal beneath his paws, a faded gray bear missing both ears and one eye, the fabric near the head chewed down to the stuffing. Miles crouched slowly, the Arizona sun painting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. "Hey, buddy," he murmured. The dog didn't move. He might have been carved from the dust. There was no collar. No food. No water. Only a dry bowl that had long since stopped pretending to be useful. The crate's latch was broken, it had been for some time. The dog could have left. But he hadn't. And something about that stuck inside Miles like a thorn. He reached out, not toward the dog, but toward the bear. The pup shifted slightly, one paw curling more tightly over the toy. "All right," Miles whispered. "You keep it." The dog's name, when it came to him, was a surprise. "Bruno," he said aloud. It came out low and reverent, like naming a star after it's already burned out. The dog blinked. Miles exhaled. He reached for the crate, lifted it carefully by the handles. Bruno didn't resist. He didn't make a sound. He simply stared, eyes wide but quiet, like a soldier watching the world fall apart. Miles set the crate gently into the truck bed, tossed an old blanket over the side. The ride home was short, 5 minutes through dry backroads flanked by sagebrush and utility poles. Miles glanced into the rearview mirror just once, and for the briefest flicker, he thought he saw the dog shift. Back home, Miles opened the garage's side door. It wasn't much, just a small living space attached to what used to be a tire service area. The inside smelled faintly of motor oil, cedar, and old memories. In the corner sat a folded blanket, blue, patterned with faded rocket ships. Caleb's favorite. Miles had never moved it. Couldn't bring himself to. He placed the crate down and opened the door wide. Bruno didn't come out. He simply curled tighter around his toy. Miles sat cross-legged on the concrete floor a few feet away. The heat still clung to him, but in here, the shadows offered a kind of peace. "You're not just guarding that thing," he said quietly. "You're waiting for something that isn't coming back." Still no response. He didn't expect one. At the window across the street, a curtain shifted. Daisy was watching. She was 9, small for her age, with straight brown hair always tied into 2 loose braids. Her knees were perpetually scratched from climbing over fences she wasn't supposed to, and her voice, when she spoke, was a shy, tin-can whisper. Daisy lived with her grandmother, Mrs. Talbot, in the single-story trailer across the gravel road. Her parents had been taken into custody the previous spring. Meth, someone had murmured at the diner, and since then, Daisy had rarely been seen without a sketchbook or a flashlight. She was afraid of dogs. 2 years ago, a neighbor's mutt had knocked her down and left a scar near her wrist. It hadn't been serious, but to Daisy, trust had a long road to travel. Yet she watched now, wide-eyed, one hand clutching the curtain. And at her feet, unnoticed by her, was a carrot from the backyard garden, one of her prized vegetables. The desert nights in Mojave Valley carried their own kind of silence, heavier, deeper, like a held breath. The garage smelled of cool metal and cedar oil, a relief from the oppressive heat of the afternoon. Overhead, a battered ceiling fan turned with a lazy creak, blades wobbling with every rotation, casting shadows like windmills on the concrete floor. Miles Benton stood by the kitchen counter, a 2-foot slab of salvaged pine wood nailed to the wall beside the fridge, and stared at the untouched bowl on the floor. Soft scrambled eggs, still warm, and a second bowl of water beside it. Bruno hadn't touched either. The golden retriever still lay curled inside the open crate, one paw over the head of the threadbare stuffed bear, as though protecting a sleeping sibling. The bear's seams were loose, the once red stitching faded to brown. The dog's eyes were open but glassy, watching the room without following it. Miles leaned back against the sink, arms crossed. "You know," he said, his voice rough from disuse, "I had a son once. He used to sleep like that, wrapped around a damn astronaut plush toy." Bruno didn't blink. Miles sighed and rubbed his eyes. He looked older under fluorescent light, his face carved by sun and grief, salt and pepper stubble dotting his jaw like ash. He hadn't expected to feel anything toward a stray, not after so long. But the stillness in Bruno, so intentional, so watchful, it stirred something in him. A memory too tender to name. Outside, a faint scuffling sound reached the door. He turned, stepping softly to the window that faced the gravel road. There she was again. Daisy stood barefoot on the cracked concrete outside the fence, one hand holding a short piece of string, the other dangling awkwardly at her side. She wore a faded yellow sundress and carried a small, imperfectly round carrot in her palm, mud still clinging to its roots. She didn't try to get closer. Just placed it down carefully by the gate, then retreated 3 steps like she was lighting a candle at a shrine. Miles watched from the shadows, unseen. He hadn't spoken to Daisy more than twice since she and her grandmother moved in. She was polite, careful, like someone who learned early not to expect kindness to last. He saw the way she clutched her sleeves when people talked too loudly. The way she avoided anything with teeth or claws. And yet here she was. Offering tribute to the thing she feared. He didn't move until she disappeared behind her trailer door. Then he stepped outside, picked up the carrot, and left it on the table near the sink. Back in the garage, Bruno had shifted. Not much. Just a subtle turn of the head toward the sound of the door. "You're listening," Miles said softly. "Even if you won't move." He grabbed a folded blanket from a storage chest in the corner, dark blue, stitched with little rocket ships. "Caleb's." He hadn't touched it in over a year. Kneeling beside the crate, he gently placed the blanket a few inches away on the concrete. This was his, Miles murmured. He would have liked you. No sudden movement. No commands. Just an offering. Bruno's eyes flicked toward it, then back to the bear. But 10 minutes later, after Miles had sat down to tinker with an old carburetor at his workbench, he heard it. A quiet scrape. He looked up. Bruno had left the crate. His legs were wobbly, and his fur bristled slightly from the chill of the concrete. But he dragged the stuffed bear across the floor, paw by paw, until he reached the blanket. With a soft grunt, he lay down, curling his long frame into the shape of a crescent moon, exactly as Caleb used to. Miles didn't speak. Didn't move. But something rose in his throat, grief, not like fire, but like rain. Steady. Soaked in old memory. That night, he didn't sleep. Not really. He sat in the old recliner, blanket pulled over his knees, watching the slow rise and fall of Bruno's chest in the half-light. Once or twice, the dog's paws twitched in dreams. He never made a sound. Not a whimper. Not a growl. Silence, like armor. The next morning came with wind, the kind that rattled tin siding and carried sand across the thresholds. Miles poured himself black coffee and dropped another scoop of eggs into the bowl. Bruno didn't move. But when Miles stepped outside to check the rust on his truck's brake line, he came back in to find the water bowl half empty. The eggs remained, but the dog had stirred. Progress. Later that afternoon, he found a folded note on his gate, clipped under a rock. I'm not afraid if he doesn't bark. Daisy. There was a small drawing below the sentence, 3 stick figures, a man, a dog, and a girl. The dog had a red circle over its chest, maybe meant to be a badge. Or a heart. Miles smiled despite himself. He didn't know what to say. Or even if he should say anything. So instead, he walked inside, reached into a cabinet, and pulled out a second plush animal from a dusty box in the back. A brown owl, with a threadbare wing and one button eye. Caleb's backup bedtime toy. He hadn't touched it in years. He walked outside and placed it on the fence post where Daisy had left the carrot. Late afternoon in Mojave Valley bled into a golden dusk, the sun casting long, lazy rays over the dust-streaked windows of Miles Benton's garage. Inside, the shadows shifted, softened by the yellow-orange glow from a single overhead sunlamp Miles had rigged over the main workspace. It wasn't pretty, but it worked, humming quietly like a heartbeat above the room. Bruno lay curled on Caleb's rocket blanket near the far corner. His frame, still too thin, had begun to fill ever so slightly, his ribs no longer threatening to cut through his golden coat. The bear was still beneath one paw, its fur flattened where Bruno rested his chin. He had not yet barked, not once, but in the past 2 days, he had moved, a little more each hour. Miles sat nearby on a wheeled stool, his back hunched as he filed down a rusted bracket for an old Chevy he'd been meaning to restore. His hands, calloused and sure, moved with steady rhythm, but his eyes often drifted, not to the bracket, but to the dog. Bruno, he said gently. That's what I'm calling you, you know. Not that you voted on it. Bruno blinked. It was more than Miles had expected. He took a breath. I used to train horses. That was before the shop. Before Caleb. You teach enough animals, you learn when one's got something locked inside. A small shift, Bruno adjusted his paws, curled his toes. Miles set down the tool. You're not hiding from the world. You're just, watching it from behind the glass. The air was thick with unspoken things. Then came a sound, soft, quick, knuckles against corrugated steel. Miles turned toward the source. Through the open garage door, he saw Daisy. She was standing on the edge of his driveway in faded sneakers 2 sizes too large. Her dress today was blue, with tiny sunflowers printed across the hem. One braid was loose, the other undone entirely. She held something in her hand, an old Polaroid photo, edges curled. Miles walked slowly out to meet her. Daisy didn't flinch, but her gaze dropped to the photo. "This is my mom," she said, voice no louder than the wind. "When she was happy. Before the cuffs." Miles didn't know what to say. Daisy held out the photo, then quickly pulled it back. "I just wanted you to see someone who also changed." He nodded. "Thanks for showing me." She glanced toward the inside of the garage. "Is the dog still there?" "Yeah. Hasn't left his post." Daisy kicked a stone with the toe of her shoe. "You think he's broken?" Miles smiled faintly. "No. I think he's deciding whether the world still deserves him." Daisy tilted her head, curious. "Do you think he remembers what hurt him?" "I think," Miles said slowly, "he remembers who didn't stay." Daisy was quiet for a while. Then she asked, "Can I see him?" "From far?" Miles hesitated. "You can stand by the door. If he doesn't move, that's okay." They walked together. Daisy peeked through the garage opening and saw Bruno for the first time up close. He didn't move. Didn't growl. Didn't turn his head. But his eyes, those liquid honey eyes, blinked once. Daisy exhaled. "That's the bear," she whispered. "He's protecting it." "Or it's protecting him," Miles murmured. She stepped back slowly. "I'll draw them. Can I bring the picture tomorrow?" Miles nodded. He'd like that. That night, as the last light left the valley and stars blinked into view, Bruno stood up. Not a stretch, not a pace. Just stood. He turned to face the doorway where Daisy had been moments earlier. Then, with slow and deliberate steps, he walked to the water bowl. He drank. And when he was done, he didn't return to the crate. He lay instead near the center of the floor, paws tucked under, eyes half-lidded. Miles watched in silence, heart caught somewhere between gratitude and ache. "You've been waiting for someone to see you," he said. And today, someone did. In the morning, a folded page rested on the gate. A drawing, Bruno with the bear, under a sun bigger than the sky. Next to him, a girl with a braid and a man with a wrench. They were all smiling. And above them, in Daisy's handwriting. "This is the garage where broken things stay until they're not." Late afternoon in Mojave Valley bled into a golden dusk, the sun casting long, lazy rays over the dust-streaked windows of Miles Benton's garage. Inside, the shadows shifted, softened by the yellow-orange glow from a single overhead sunlamp Miles had rigged over the main workspace. It wasn't pretty, but it worked, humming quietly like a heartbeat above the room. Bruno lay curled on Caleb's rocket blanket near the far corner. His frame, still too thin, had begun to fill ever so slightly, his ribs no longer threatening to cut through his golden coat. The bear was still beneath one paw, its fur flattened where Bruno rested his chin. He had not yet barked, not once, but in the past 2 days, he had moved, a little more each hour. Miles sat nearby on a wheeled stool, his back hunched as he filed down a rusted bracket for an old Chevy he'd been meaning to restore. His hands, calloused and sure, moved with steady rhythm, but his eyes often drifted, not to the bracket, but to the dog. "Bruno," he said gently. "That's what I'm calling you, you know. Not that you voted on it." Bruno blinked. It was more than Miles had expected. He took a breath. "I used to train horses. That was before the shop. Before Caleb. You teach enough animals, you learn when one's got something locked inside." A small shift, Bruno adjusted his paws, curled his toes. Miles set down the tool. "You're not hiding from the world. You're just, watching it from behind the glass." The air was thick with unspoken things. Then came a sound, soft, quick, knuckles against corrugated steel. Miles turned toward the source. Through the open garage door, he saw Daisy. She was standing on the edge of his driveway in faded sneakers 2 sizes too large. Her dress today was blue, with tiny sunflowers printed across the hem. One braid was loose, the other undone entirely. She held something in her hand, an old Polaroid photo, edges curled. Miles walked slowly out to meet her. Daisy didn't flinch, but her gaze dropped to the photo. "This is my mom," she said, voice no louder than the wind. "When she was happy. Before the cuffs." Miles didn't know what to say. Daisy held out the photo, then quickly pulled it back. "I just wanted you to see someone who also changed." He nodded. "Thanks for showing me." She glanced toward the inside of the garage. "Is the dog still there?" "Yeah. Hasn't left his post." Daisy kicked a stone with the toe of her shoe. "You think he's broken?" Miles smiled faintly. "No. I think he's deciding whether the world still deserves him." Daisy tilted her head, curious. "Do you think he remembers what hurt him?" "I think," Miles said slowly, "he remembers who didn't stay." Daisy was quiet for a while. Then she asked, "Can I see him?" "From far?" Miles hesitated. "You can stand by the door. If he doesn't move, that's okay." They walked together. Daisy peeked through the garage opening and saw Bruno for the first time up close. He didn't move. Didn't growl. Didn't turn his head. But his eyes, those liquid honey eyes, blinked once. Daisy exhaled. "That's the bear," she whispered. "He's protecting it." "Or it's protecting him," Miles murmured. She stepped back slowly. "I'll draw them. Can I bring the picture tomorrow?" Miles nodded. He'd like that. That night, as the last light left the valley and stars blinked into view, Bruno stood up. Not a stretch, not a pace. Just stood. He turned to face the doorway where Daisy had been moments earlier. Then, with slow and deliberate steps, he walked to the water bowl. He drank. And when he was done, he didn't return to the crate. He lay instead near the center of the floor, paws tucked under, eyes half-lidded. Miles watched in silence, heart caught somewhere between gratitude and ache. "You've been waiting for someone to see you," he said. And today, someone did. In the morning, a folded page rested on the gate. A drawing, Bruno with the bear, under a sun bigger than the sky. Next to him, a girl with a braid and a man with a wrench. They were all smiling. And above them, in Daisy's handwriting, "This is the garage where broken things stay until they're not." By late morning, the Mojave sun had resumed its quiet tyranny, brilliant, dry, and constant. Miles Benton stood at the edge of his workbench, sanding the edge of a makeshift wooden ramp he'd crafted from discarded pallet boards. He wiped sweat from his brow and squinted toward the garage door, where rays of light spilled in like golden sheets. Inside, Bruno sat alert beside the rocket blanket. Not curled, not frozen, sitting. His chest rose slowly. His nose twitched each time the breeze shifted. His tail, still tucked most of the time, now rested slightly to the side. And the bear, though still close, had been nudged a few inches away. Miles set down the sander and called out softly. "You've been watching that door for 2 days, pup. You ready to see what's outside?" Bruno didn't move. Not yet. But he didn't retreat either. So Miles took a step forward, then another. He knelt beside the plush bear, picked it up gently by the leg, and walked slowly backward toward the sun. "Let's go for a walk." Bruno remained motionless. Then, with a slow inhale, he rose. It wasn't graceful. He staggered slightly, as if unsure whether his legs still remembered how to work. But he came, each step deliberate, like a soldier crossing old ground. At the threshold, Bruno stopped. His paws reached the line between shadow and sunlight. The heat hit him like a wave. His ears perked. His body stiffened. Miles turned, crouched, and placed the bear just ahead of the ramp. Bruno hesitated. Then took a step. Then another. By the time his paws hit the ramp, a wind kicked up from the west, ruffling his pale golden fur like a field of wheat bending to breeze. For 5 seconds, Bruno stood there, head high, back straight, bear in his mouth, and in the light, he didn't look like a puppy at all. He looked like a lion. And then, for the first time, he ran. Not far, only 10 or 15 feet into the gravel lot, but it was a run, sudden, joyous, awkward. His ears flopped, tail wagged once, then twice. The stuffed bear bounced comically between his teeth, trailing thread like a banner. Miles watched from the ramp, breath caught in his chest. He hadn't seen motion like that since Caleb. And in that moment, for the first time in 2 years, he laughed. Low, rough, honest. Bruno turned, ears twitching at the sound. He looked at Miles, eyes deep as desert wells, and wagged his tail again. Then he trotted back. No command. No reward. Just a choice. To return. Across the street, a figure had been watching, barefoot on a patch of dried grass, gripping a rolled-up notebook in both hands. Daisy. She approached slowly, stopping a few feet short of the fence. He ran, she whispered. Miles turned. He did. He looked happy. Miles nodded. He looked free. Daisy hesitated, then held out her sketchbook. I brought the picture. It was drawn in pencil, smudged at the edges from too much gripping. Bruno stood in profile, bigger than in real life, his tail lifted like a flag. Next to him was a rocket, just like the one on the blanket. And above them, stars. He's going somewhere, Daisy said. Even if it's just here. Miles took the drawing gently, as if it might crumble. He'd be honored. Daisy bit her lip. Can I come in? Miles glanced at Bruno. The pup had returned to the edge of the garage, lying near the bear, chest heaving from exertion but eyes wide with attention. You can come close, Miles said. If he moves, we stop. Daisy stepped carefully over the gravel, her feet dusty but quick. She knelt near the entrance, arms folded over her knees. Bruno looked at her. She didn't speak. Didn't reach out. She just sat. After a full minute, Bruno lowered his head to the floor, his body uncoiling slightly. And there, between them, silence grew into something safe. That night, as Miles cleared the workbench and turned off the garage lights one by one, he found himself pausing. Bruno lay by the inner doorway, bear tucked under one paw, eyes half-lidded in that same sentinel pose. I never named Caleb's bear, Miles said suddenly. Bruno's ears twitched. I think I'll call it Rusty. He turned away, embarrassed by his own voice. But when he glanced back, Bruno was still looking at him. Not in confusion. Not in fear. But in knowing. At 2:14 a.m., Miles woke to the soft shuffle of paws across linoleum. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. The steps paused at the bedroom door. Then came the sound of fabric. Bruno curled up on the rug beside the bed, the bear placed gently on the floor near Miles's nightstand. No whimper. No bark. Just presence. And that was enough. The fourth day in Mojave Valley began like all the others, sunlight bleeding across a bone-dry sky, wind trailing dust across the gravel, and heat seeping through every metal seam. But inside the garage, something had shifted. Bruno no longer lay against the wall. Instead, he greeted Miles at the door with a cautious but steady gait. His golden fur still carried the dullness of recovery, but there was a new weight in his steps, anchored, intentional. No longer the ghost of a dog. Miles Benton noticed it first in the way Bruno walked, not behind him, not underfoot, but beside him, shoulder to thigh. When he looked down, Bruno glanced up only once, then looked forward again, as if to say, "I'm not following. I'm walking with you." The morning passed with quiet routine. Miles brewed black coffee in his dented enamel pot, dropped eggs into the pan, and scattered a bit of bacon grease into Bruno's bowl. This time, the dog didn't hesitate. He ate slowly, calmly, with one eye always toward the door. Miles watched him from the kitchen, arms folded. "You know," he murmured, "you're almost acting like you live here." Bruno raised his head, then returned to eating. By noon, the heat had become oppressive. Miles stepped out onto the front slab of concrete with a glass of ice water, shielding his eyes. The world shimmered. Then he heard it. Screaming. Not loud, but urgent, desperate. He looked across the road and saw Daisy, barefoot, panic etched across her face, waving both arms. He ran. By the time he reached her front yard, he could smell it, smoke, thin and bitter, curling from a broken kitchen window. Her grandmother's house. "Grandma's in there." Daisy cried. "I can't, she's not answering." Miles didn't wait. "Stay here." He sprinted toward the trailer door, pounded once, twice. "Mrs. Talbot." "It's Miles." "You in there?" No answer. He turned to kick. The wood splintered on the third hit, and smoke billowed into the porch. Inside, the stove burner glowed red, a melted pan blackened with grease. Flames hadn't caught yet, but the air was thick, choking. Miles dropped low, pulling his shirt over his nose, eyes scanning. Then he saw her, Mrs. Talbot, a woman in her late 70s, short and wiry, slumped against the fridge, unconscious. He reached for her. But Bruno beat him to it. The golden blur shot past his leg, head low, tail flat, eyes narrowed against the smoke. Bruno nosed under the woman's arm and barked, once, sharp, ringing. His first sound since arriving. Then another. Miles stumbled forward, grabbed Mrs. Talbot by the shoulders, hoisted her back. Bruno circled, snapping once at a curling curtain as the smoke thickened. They dragged her outside together, collapsing onto the front steps just as Daisy burst into tears. The dog didn't move. He stood guard, ears pinned, tail high, body steady. When the firetruck finally arrived, sirens wailing through the silence of dust and gravel, the EMTs found Bruno still in that same position. Miles crouched beside him, placing one hand on his neck, the other still shaking. "You did good," he said, his voice cracked and hoarse. "You came back for us." The fire was small. Contained. Mrs. Talbot had fainted from heat and smoke, but she would recover. Daisy clung to her grandmother's wrist while paramedics worked, and Miles stood back, eyes burning, not from smoke now, but something deeper. "Your dog," one of the firefighters said to Miles, patting Bruno's head, "he's something else." "He's not mine," Miles said automatically. Then, after a moment, "but maybe I'm his." That afternoon, silence returned, but it felt different. Bruno lay in the cool shadow of the garage doorway, the wind teasing his fur. Daisy came over with a notebook, her steps sure now. She sat down next to the dog without flinching. Bruno shifted slightly, then rested his head on her bare foot. She didn't cry. She smiled. "You're not scary," she said. "You're just quiet." Bruno thumped his tail once. Then again. And finally, Miles laughed. The sun sank toward the west, and for the first time, it felt like light instead of heat. That evening, Miles pulled out a cardboard box he hadn't touched since Caleb's funeral. Inside was a red collar, simple, wide, soft leather, with a clean blank name tag still dangling. He knelt beside Bruno. "You've earned this," he whispered. Bruno didn't move as the collar slipped over his head. But once it settled into place, he lifted his chin slightly, ears perked, not proud, but present. And when Daisy handed Miles a new drawing, this one of Bruno standing tall with fire behind him and a little girl holding his tail. Miles knew it was time. He pulled out an old metal engraver, hand trembling. He etched the tag. Bruno, the dog who stayed. Mojave Valley awoke beneath a sky not unlike the one 4 weeks ago, burning blue, dry and eternal. But something had changed. The light, though just as fierce, now fell on things that breathed again. Bruno stood at the edge of the field behind Miles's garage, the golden fur along his back rippling with each gust of wind. No leash. No command. Just wind and open space. Beside him, the bear, Rusty, rested between two small rocks like a totem, faded and threadbare but still watching. Bruno no longer clung to it. He simply acknowledged it. Miles Benton sat cross-legged a few feet behind, arms resting on his knees, watching the horizon. His face was lined and sun-worn, but softer now, less guarded. The grief was still there, but no longer a weight, more like a scar that had settled into the skin. He took a slow sip of coffee from a tin mug, then looked over at Daisy. She was crouched near a patch of dying sunflowers by the fence line, wearing Caleb's old baseball cap pushed low over her eyes. She had been spending more time at the garage since the fire. Mrs. Talbot, now fully recovered, had given her permission, though, truth be told, even if she hadn't, Daisy would have come anyway. Daisy stood up and walked toward Bruno with something cupped in her hands. "Hey, big guy," she said softly. "Brought you something." Bruno turned, alert but calm. She knelt and opened her fingers. A collar charm, tiny, brass, shaped like a lion's head. "It's from one of Grandma's old keychains. Thought it looked like you." Miles watched without speaking as Daisy clipped the charm beside the engraved tag, "Bruno, the dog who stayed." Bruno looked at her, then at Miles. Then, quietly, he walked over to where Rusty lay and placed a single paw beside the bear. A small motion. A farewell. He turned his back to it. That afternoon, they took the long walk, Miles, Daisy, and Bruno, down to the elementary school field where the fence buzzed and the chalk lines had long faded in the sun. It wasn't an official park, but no one stopped them. Children played in the distance. One girl, no more than 6, sat alone near a bench, her white cane resting on her lap. Daisy spotted her first. "That's Ava. She's blind, but she likes animals. Doesn't talk much." Miles looked down at Bruno. "You think he'll do all right?" Daisy grinned. "I think he's already made up his mind." Bruno approached Ava slowly, his body low but confident, tail a gentle pendulum behind him. The girl turned her head toward him even before he reached her. "Is that a dog?" she asked into the air. Miles stepped forward. "Yes. His name's Bruno. Like the song?" "No," Daisy said, laughing. "Like the lion who doesn't need to roar." Bruno stopped in front of Ava, sniffed gently. Then he did something that surprised even Miles. He lay down, belly flat, nose tucked under Ava's fingers. She reached out, touching his head, then his ears, her small fingers curious but respectful. "He's soft," she whispered. "He's strong," Daisy added. They sat that way for a long time, girl and dog, no words, no need for them. Miles turned to the fence, watching kids chase a worn soccer ball beneath the flat blue sky. He didn't smile outwardly. But something in his chest let go. That evening, as the last sun dipped beneath the edge of the town and shadows stretched across the concrete floor of the garage, Bruno did not return to the corner near the crate. He lay by the door, facing outward. As if he was guarding not just Miles, but the street, the neighbors, the entire town. Daisy helped Miles prepare a small shelf above the workbench. Together, they placed Rusty, the bear, on it. Miles didn't say much. Just dusted the shelf once and nodded. "He doesn't need it anymore," Daisy said. "No," Miles replied. "But it's part of what brought him here." Later that night, Daisy brought over a small folded letter. It wasn't addressed. Inside were 3 simple sentences, written in blocky handwriting. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me become Bruno. Miles didn't ask if she wrote it. He just folded it and placed it next to the shelf. The next morning, Miles woke to the sound of paws jumping onto the bed, not tentative, not slow. Just presence. Bruno curled next to him, head resting across Miles's thigh. Miles didn't move. Didn't speak. He just placed a hand on Bruno's back and felt the steady breath, strong, rhythmic. The sound of a heart that had chosen to stay. Sometimes, healing doesn't come with noise or grand rescue. It begins quietly, with a dog who stays even when the world tells him to disappear, with a girl brave enough to sit beside her fear, and with a man learning that broken doesn't mean beyond repair. In Bruno's silence, we witnessed resilience. In his loyalty, we saw redemption. And in his choice to stay, we were reminded. You don't have to roar to be strong. You just have to stay when it matters most. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment, Amen, if you believe that every lost soul deserves a second chance. And may God bless those who stay when it's hardest to.